Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video we're going to rank the attachment boxes that recently came out for A Song of Ice and Fire, the miniatures game. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that the discussion in this video around the attachment boxes is going to be is occurring before the big update that's coming for A Song of Ice and Fire. Even though they don't want to say it's a big update, I have a feeling that it's going to be a fairly substantial update based on what we've seen in all the Visions of in Flames articles. So I'm going to try and not talk about the specific abilities of units that are going to be kind of stapled to some of these attachments, and more so just kind of the fundamentals of the units, because I really don't think those are going to change. I really don't think we're going to get unit changes that completely redefine how a unit gets used in the game. So I just wanted to put that out there, because if you're listening to this post those changes, it's likely that some things might not match up depending on what I talk about, but I'm hoping to try and avoid that as much as possible. Starting off the list, it pains me to say that free folk are in the bottom spot. And before you say something like, oh, well, there's only 5 of them, so somebody's got to be at the bottom, I think that in the future, as we get released, or these attachment boxes released for Targaryens, Greyjoys, and whoever else decides to fold into the fray, free folk will always be on the bottom of that list. They're never going to be better than anything else that comes out. I firmly believe that. And one of the big reasons for it is, I guess it's multifaceted. There's at least 3 reasons why this isn't a functional... Well, it's functional. It's just not good for a free folk player, I think. Most of these attachment boxes come with 3 old attachments and 3 new attachments. The Free Folk one comes with 5 old attachments and only 1 new attachment. And the other thing about being a Free Folk player is you're likely to have a lot of their units because things are typically less expensive. I am in a different position than most because I overcommit to a lot of the purchases when it comes to Free Folk. I mean, I've got my 3 units of Champions of Bone and 3 units of Thin Warriors. So the fact that Champion of Bone and the Chosen of Styre are in this box don't really appeal to me a whole bunch. I do think they're nice attachments to have, but for a lot of Free Folk players, we've really gone overboard on Free Folk Raiders, Cave Dwellers when they were still really the top-notch unit, and some of us got a little bit squirrely and decided to buy a bunch of Spearwife Matriarchs, or Spearwives, because they were one of the first units that came out, really, that was outside of the starters. So when you look at those 5 attachments, those are all things that I think a lot of Free Folk players already have access to. And when you factor in that the Spearwife Matriarch was released as a fancy sculpt for the tournament packs that they had, a lot of Free Folk players have tons of those too. So they really could have wiped the Spearwife Matriarch out of this box and plugged in another new attachment, and I think it would have been better. The Raid Leader I could also see go because we have plenty of them. I know that they're an alternate sculpt and there's a lot of value in that too, but when it comes to what you're trying to sell to people, I just don't feel like the alternate sculpts add a lot of value for a good amount of Free Folk players out there. Now, when we go over to the new piece that we got, the Walrus Clan Chieftain, he rings in at 2 points and brings the order Resilience. This triggers when the unit's attacked after the attack dice are rolled, and the unit only suffers 1 wound for every 2 unblocked hits. Now that's a really cool ability, but 2 points is a lot in a Free Folk army, and when you think about the things that this piece would be going on to, we're looking at Fen Warriors and Champions of Bone sometimes, and given the right modifiers or the proper unit attacking them, this guy kind of loses a little bit of his oomph, and it is only an order. I think for 2 points, this could have just been an always-on thing, and it probably would have been a lot better. It would have made it feel less, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to me. I think attachments in general have a weird position in the game right now, but this Walrus Clan Chieftain, given the way that Free Folk is set right now, with lower resilient units, and even their more resilient ones being like the super middle of the road, where one modifier kind of tips them over the edge into being not super survivable, I just don't feel like the Walrus Clan Chieftain at 2 points really puts up those numbers. I really feel like this could have been 1 point with the order, but 2 points if it was always on. leagues away from the previous spot, we've got the Lannisters holding number 4. And their legacy attachments are interesting in this box because we've had alternate sculpts of all of them, but that doesn't make me have the same response as the Spearwife one, because when you got those Spearwives, typically you would get them in sets of 4. So this one, you've got the Special Champion of Faith that came out when the game was released through Kickstarter, I believe. And that one seems like it's a tough one to nail down for some people these days. So having an alternate Champion of Faith is good, especially since people didn't really go, not everyone, but a lot of people didn't go super deep into the Warrior's Sons. So the champions got a really great update that makes them super valuable in a lot of different builds. So having something like that accessible in this box is really nice instead of having to buy another Warrior's Sons unit. The Guard Captain and Assault Veteran are still really good pieces. That Assault Veteran I still feel is like one of the best attachments for poor fellows and still does well with Halberdiers. The Guard Captain, I think with the new changes that the Lannister Guard are seeing in the new edition update, or not edition, but the new version update, I still think they're going to be solid, if not even more prevalent than what they were with the last update because of the way Panic kind of changed a little bit. You want your guards to be resilient and stick around, and just having another sculpt out there is kind of sweet. Just because those alternate sculpts are a little bit more limited, right? When we get to the 3 new attachments, there's some things that I'm super stoked for in here and some things I'm not so much. The first one I'm super stoked for is that Turncoat. They are 1 point and have the Sabotage and Subvert rule. Once per game at the start of the turn, your opponent may deal this unit 1 wound, which means you would just remove the Turncoat model. And if you do, this unit gains 1 condition token of the opponent's choice and may not use orders or be the target of friendly tactics cards this turn. So if you're not familiar with how this Turncoat actually works when you're reading through it, it's a lot like Maimed Jaime, which a lot of people also aren't using because it hasn't been released yet. So the Turncoat, you can plop him into one of your opponent's units after they've deployed. And then the way that the wording kind of functions is that it's an ability that's on the unit that your opponent owns, so like you then become the opponent. So essentially, to boil this down real simple, the Turncoat just says you put it in an opponent's unit after deployment's done, and then you, the person who owns that Turncoat, like physically, can just destroy it at the start of any turn to add a condition token of your choice, and then stop them from using orders or tactics cards. For 1 point, this is a really strong piece. I think that this is the kind of thing I'd like to see more in the Lannister faction. I think it would really give them a stronger identity in the game, so more subterfuge and messing around with stuff, I feel like, is what I'd like to see more of. So the Turncoat's a super great piece, and it is probably the thing in this list that would make me want to buy more of these boxes just to get more of those Turncoats. The one I'm not super excited about that kind of really drags this box down to the 4th spot is the Sentinel Enforcer. At 1 point, we get the Order Taunt, and this triggers when an enemy within short range that has line of sight to this unit, the Sentinel's unit, activates. That enemy must make a morale test, and if they fail, they must declare a charge action if possible against this target. So I really think that Taunt is one of the worst special rules in the game. I think I've stated this a couple times with Then. I really don't take Then thinking that Taunt will ever really do anything for me. I only ever take them because they get the bonuses, or they ignore bonuses on charging, and they're somewhat resilient and have decent morale. But for this, I really don't. I think if your opponent's within short range of you, especially in a Lannister list where you're probably not going to have as many bodies on the table, it feels like this is just not super great. And if someone's playing into a Lannister list and you're in a pairing situation, or maybe even some people are just kind of building to have good morale anyways, Taunt really doesn't do a ton for you. So I feel like this guy is probably the worst attachment out of the entirety of the entire line. So even worse than anything that would come in the Free Folk one, because I can justify the Walrus Chieftain's existence, but this Sentinel Enforcer, I just really don't like it. The other one in the box that's new is a cavalry attachment called the Clegane Butcher, and this piece is 2 points and brings the Order Soter, where if when an enemy engaged with this unit fails a panic test, one other enemy within long range suffers a panic test as well. They also bring the Weaken Resolve ability, so when an enemy engaged with this unit fails a panic test, that enemy becomes weakened. I think that the Clegane Butcher does a lot for helping the Knights of Casterly Rock kind of survive a little bit. It's not the greatest for them because they've got other options that are, well, one option that's better really, and that's just another Hand of the King attachment. But the Flayed Men can get a lot of use out of this. I think that there's a lot of potential with this piece, but being a 2-point attachment when you're already taking a really expensive cavalry unit, it's at least good that all of the cav that Lannisters have access to is pretty survivable outside of like the weird like non-Flayed Men mercenaries. So I feel like the Clegane Butcher kind of lifts this up way above the Free Folk, or doesn't drag it down, I guess it is probably what I would rather say. I think that it's a good piece and can definitely get some use in Lannister panic-based list since he's able to throw so many things around and keep units on the table longer, making the things that he's engaged with weaken. I really do think that the home spot for the Butcher is in the Flayed Men and less in the Knights of Casterly Rock, but it wouldn't be terrible to see him there. Now, the fight between the second and third spot was a very bloody one, but it ended up settling into the Starks taking the third spot, but not laying down whatsoever. The legacy attachments that come in this box set are the Umber Champion, the Sworn Sword Captain, and the Crannogman Warden. So Umber Champions are super phenomenal. Starks have so many great foot units, and the Umber Champion, for a very low cost of 1 point, ends up giving you a super huge spike to your combat output. I think that it's just a great piece and takes any unit. Like, think of the Tully Sworn Swords or Sworn Shields as an example. They don't have a ton of combat output, but as soon as you plop a Umber Champion in there, they get downright dangerous and they're hard to shift, so it makes it even more tough for your opponent to really respond to these units, even though they happen to be speed 4. So I think it's nice to have that piece in here. There's a lot of flavor in the Umber stuff, so it's great to have more sculpts in that realm. The next one is the Sworn Sword Captain, and I really don't this isn't a big deal, to me at least. We've already had one alternate sculpt in the Hand of the King box set, and if you're even anywhere near wanting to play somewhat competitively as a Stark player, you've probably got multiples of these Sworn Sword Captains hanging around, and they really don't do a whole lot for that unit in particular, or not just the unit, but the Starks in general. I think if you're playing Roderick, you might see a couple of these kicking around, but it's nice at least to have a third sculpt in the set, but not something that I could have taken, or it could have not been in here, and I wouldn't have shed a tear over it. The Crannogman Warden is a good one, though. I think that there are some people who still have a hard time getting on the train of saying that the Crannogman trackers are really good, so they don't probably have access to a lot of Wardens. And it was in the Hand of the King box set as an alternate sculpt. It was a beautiful sculpt, right? And sometimes it's hard to discern between the Crannogman Warden and the rest of the Crannogman trackers from the box set. So it's nice to have another alt sculpt in here to help with that. Plus, this could get people access to the Warden a little bit easier who might just want to put them in their Stark Bowman or into one of the other mercenary options that are ranged for the Starks. I think they feel really good, of course, in any ranged unit. But it's a welcome piece in here, and I think a lot of people will enjoy having it. Now, getting to the new attachments, the first one is probably the most exciting and most disappointing at the same time, which is really par for the course when I explain why that is. It's the Mormont Veteran for 1 point. Now, I'm super stoked to see Mormont getting a more solid presence in the game, even if it's just this veteran. It just opens up the door to having additional units from the Mormont house put in here. And I think that the Starks in general, I just really enjoy the idea of all these different houses being represented, because you can go ahead and carve out your own little area of the house you enjoy and play that thing. It's really fluffy, and it's also really effective too. None of those sub-houses that are within the Stark canon or the Stark army are really bad. I mean, you couldn't play an all Crannogman army and really have a good time. I mean, somebody wouldn't have a good time. You either just crumple like paper, or you destroy people, or you realize that you just spent like $150 on Crannogman trackers. But regardless, the ability that the Mormont veteran brings with them is Harden, and this just allows the unit to block an additional hit automatically for each one of their destroyed ranks. And the issue that I have with this is it makes the piece really clunky. I think that the designers were trying to make something cute and effective, and something that you kind of had to make a negotiation to put into your unit. At one point, it's very affordable, but it also doesn't really do anything until you start losing pieces. And then as you start losing pieces, it only kind of prolongs the process a little bit of losing the unit completely. Not that that's a big problem or anything. I mean, that's what it's supposed to do. But you think about what kind of unit wants this. So you want it to be in a unit that loses ranks, not quickly, but quickly enough to where you can start getting use out of it early. So that means you would put it in a low save unit. But then that also means that that unit's probably just going to get evaporated fast, because blocking one additional hit or two additional hits while there's few pieces left in there isn't really going to save it a whole bunch. So then you start looking at units that have a higher save value or a lower save value, right? You want the better save. And then you're just putting a 1-point attachment in here that really does nothing until you start losing ranks, and they're already, once you're like blocking those hits automatically, they're already doing the job that they're supposed to do with their innate save value. So you might end up finding yourself not getting a whole lot of value out of the Mormont veteran. It's either the unit dies too quickly, or the unit doesn't die enough, and they're not really doing anything to help the combat process, right? So I think the Mormont veteran, super excited to see Mormonts in the game, super not excited to put this on any unit that I possibly have, and it's probably one of the things between this and the Sworn Sword Captain that knocked the Starks down into that third spot. The next one is the Crannogman Survivalist, coming in at 2 points. It's pricey for an attachment, but it brings two things with it. Elusive Escape just says this unit can reroll all their retreat distance rolls, and enemy units that this unit disengages from suffer D3 wounds and cannot pivot when they retreat. So that's a super awesome ability. The next one is Pathfinder. And this is on a lot of different pieces in the game, but it gives the unit +1 speed, and they ignore dangerous, rough, and hindering keywords from terrain pieces. So although an expensive attachment, this piece does a ton of work for going into something like a Crannogman tracker list. You get your cool quickfire ability, and you get to do the D3 wounds when you disengage from them. And one of the things that kind of bums me out about when I play Crannogman sometimes is I really have to play this great positioning game where it's like, when I retreat with my Crannogman, you either pivot and then get your better save because I'm not shooting you in a flank. But if you do that, that means that you're opening yourself up to a charge that I've set in front of you. And sometimes I just like the Crannogman to go off and do their own things. But then my opponent being able to pivot and ignore the -1 armor penalty for shooting in the flank can kind of make it so that all I've really done is just send a 5-point distraction unit out into the middle of nowhere just to tie something up and die. And that's fine if you're trying to really jam those objectives home. But with this, you can get a ton of work done, because not only are you getting your D3 wounds onto the unit when you disengage from the retreat, you also can get as far away as you want to. And since they can't pivot, you're not eligible to be charged. So if you're, taking that maneuver position a ton on the board and not going for cavalry with this unit, your opponent's kind of stuck, and it's difficult for them to negotiate around it. And the Pathfinder is really great too. I think some people, they don't really value the ability to ignore the dangerous thing, but I think stakes are going to get more and more prevalent in the game as time goes on. And we already know that the rough and hindering keywords are really a big bummer. So putting these on units that are that want to get around on the table, it works out pretty well for them. Plus, if they're a combat unit and they have to retreat in order to do something, they're at least not missing out on these D3 wounds. Sometimes if a unit's low enough, you can just disengage with the retreat and then wipe the unit out with the D3 wounds. So I feel like the Crannogman Survivalist is a really cool piece, even if it's a little pricey, but I think that this is one of the most perfectly pointed attachments that's in any of these box sets. The final new attachment is the Winterfell Guardian. So at one point, we get the order Stubborn Tenacity. When this unit passes a panic test, one enemy engaged with them suffers D3 wounds. So the fancy thing about this one is it's a cavalry attachment. So it's unique, right? Because that Stubborn Tenacity ability would be really cool on one of the foot units, because we've got so many Umbers and Tully units that can really get a lot of work out of passing their morale tests. You know, you attack them and they're either going to block really well or do a bunch more damage to you because you're wiping their ranks down, and since they have a good morale stat, they're going to pass it and then shoot D3 wounds at you. But being on a cavalry is kind of the balancing point for this. The 1 point is really nice here. I think if it were any more, it probably would have not been super great and might have even kicked down into the 4th spot. The fight would be between the Lannisters and the Starks for the 4th spot, right? But the big reason why I think this is really good for the Starks is that the Tully Cavaliers really have an amazing morale stat, and people want to attack them. But once you end up putting this on there, not only are they doing a ton of damage on the initial hit, if they don't wipe out the unit completely between all the buffs that you get, any kind of retaliation is going to end up zapping your opponent too. So I think that the Winterfell Guardian fits well there, and it's not so bad in the Outriders either, just because their morale is decent too, decent enough to where they should be passing it, like at least on average. So putting him in that unit, it's just nice if you have an extra point, you don't really have a good place to put it. I know there's a couple Brendan Tully lists, mounted Tully lists that I've made where the points get kind of wonky because of the way cavalry is so expensive and I have so few places to make that up. But having a Winterfell Guardian to throw in a couple units helps kind of even that out a little bit. So I think overall the Stark box really fits well in that 3rd spot, and I think any Stark player would be happy to have it. So Night's Watch end up taking the 2nd spot for a number of reasons. One of the big ones is that there are only 2 legacy attachments in this box, and I feel like that should have been the goal for all of these boxes, is to only have 2 legacy attachments and have them be the most sought after ones. The Watch Captain's a little bit mopey in here because I think plenty of us have tons of Watch Captains, and it's not like they're seeing a lot of play right now, especially considering Night's Watch is a really elite style army. But I'm fine with them being in here. It's nice to see an additional sculpt, and it's a decent. I like the piece. I think the Watch Captain changes are really good. The one that is really a big deal is the Watch Recruiter. Now, this piece came in the Conscripts box, and originally when they were released, people wanted the Watch Recruiter much more than they wanted the Conscripts, and so much to the point where they ended up using the alternate sculpt Conscripts that came in that tournament pack as their Watch Recruiters. So now it's at least good that people have an outlet for that, even though the Conscripts are a really great unit right now, and I think Night's Watch players should own at least 2 or 3 of these. I think 3 might be a little much, but 2 is probably where I would put my foot down. And Watch Recruiters, even if you're not playing with Conscripts, are really good, especially in a bunch of Sworn Brother units. So it's nice to see that that piece gets put in here. I think it was a much-needed thing. It's good to have extra access to it. The other thing that really pushed this box above the Starks is that it comes with a solo unit, and that solo unit also is dual purpose because it has it's an attachment as well. So the attachment version of the Watch Marshal is 2 points and adds the rule Quickfire or Order Quickfire to a unit that it gets attached to. And this just says after the unit's completed a maneuver or retreat, they can make 1 free ranged attack. It also has the Unbreakable Vows ability, so now we can get that cool Watch Captain ability onto one of our cavalry units. So really right now, the only thing that this is going to be going into is the Ranger Trackers. And that's perfectly fine. That unit is aces and is already at a 10 in my opinion. And this guy for 2 points cranks it up to an 11. And I think those 2 points are definitely worth it. You end up getting an extra ranged attack out of them, and you get those extra 2 vows. So like if you're when your army's a little bit more condensed, you end up having to switch vows a lot, and sometimes you might not want to do that. So having unbreakable vows on a unit like the Ranger Trackers is really nice, since they do get quite a few benefits from them. I think that he's a perfect attachment, and as long as I've got the points, I would have a really hard time not including this on one of my Ranger Tracker units. It'll always be there, at least in my opinion. As a solo piece, for 3 points, we only get a 2-wound model, but he's a real big support model in my opinion. So we've got 6 speed with 3+ attack on his longsword, but there's only two swings off of it. We get a 4+ armor save and a 3+ morale. So the stats are pretty decent. I mean, like, the morale's amazing, but the armor save is, it's whatever. But the at 2 wounds, it's at a 4+, you're not really, doing a whole lot. But it does take a lot of pointed effort to get him out here. It just makes it... The problem with the 2 wounds, in my opinion, is just that he's really susceptible to those D3 shots that might happen out there, those D3 wounds. So pretty easy to take down. But the first ability that he brings on is the order called Follow Me. And this just triggers when the Watch Marshal ends up making a maneuver or march action, but then before they end up moving, so before you even touch the model, you want to make sure you trigger this off. One friendly unit within short range can make a free maneuver action after this guy's done his shtick. So this is super cool. I think that it makes the Night's Watch army a lot more aggressive, and for multiple reasons, right? Because you're throwing the unit further up the table, and for 6 points you could get 2 of these guys, and that's the same price as one's Sworn Brother unit. And just being able to present your army a lot earlier and kind of determine that line of engagement is super duper important. The other thing that the Marshal ends up bringing with him is the Marshal ability, of course. And the only one that's not pertinent to him being cavalry is that other friendly units within short range roll +1 attack die on melee attacks. So not only are you getting your army further up the table, but you end up getting additional attacks out of this. So I think that the Watch Marshal is the piece that Jorah Mormont wanted to be. Like, super duper supporty, and doesn't have to lead from the front, but can put in a little bit of damage to get some things down here and there. But I feel like the Watch Marshal is the perfect piece for the Night's Watch army. Next up for new pieces, we get the Hardened Ranger. So the Hardened Ranger for 2 points ends up getting the ability Bushwhack on melee attacks. This just says that enemies this unit successfully charge in the flank or rear become panicked and weakened. They also have the elusive escape rule that we saw in the Stark box that just says they can re-roll their retreat distance rolls, and when they disengage from a unit, that unit can't pivot, and they suffer D3 wounds. So the Ranger Hunters are really... I think they're a lot better than people think they are. And I've always put, like, random attachments on them to kind of make them better. I think Pip is one of the ones that I really like throwing in here. But this Hardened Ranger does a lot for them. More often than not, you're going to be getting charges on the flank or rear of your opponent's units. So getting panicked and weakened really helps those Ranger Hunters push that damage hard. And with Elusive Escape, you end up being able to do some of the last wounds and kind of reposition the unit. I feel like between the Watch Marshal, especially when you add him on here for the Follow Me order and everything, you're getting a lot of extra value out of these. It feels like the Sworn Brothers can actually, or not Sworn Brothers, the Night's Watch player can really play this cool, like, super stealthy Ranger style play with this attachment box just between those two things, the Watch Marshal and the Hardened Ranger. I think that it'll be a great piece, and if people are really, like, kind of, dragging their feet on the Ranger Hunters, put this guy in there, and I think that you'll really enjoy the way that the unit performs. The other one we get is the Senior Builder. So the Senior Builder is a 1-point attachment, and he just has the ability called Stake Building, and it just reads that once per game at the start of any round, you can put up a terrain piece that they're stakes, right? They have the dangerous, destructible, and hindering keywords within 2 inches of his unit. You can't place it over other terrain or other combat units, but the cool thing about this is I think that it's nice to kind of set up a bunker for yourself. I think that this guy fits really well into like a Donald play style where you can kind of create this defensive bunker, own an objective with a unit and then say I'm putting stakes in front of myself right now and you're not going to want to charge me over this because chances are you might not be able to make the charge going over that hindering terrain, and if you do, you're going to be taking a bunch of wounds every time you swing at me. So I think overall the senior builder feels really good, especially since you're able to kind of manipulate the battlefield after the fact. But the other really big thing about the senior builder is that he gives you access to a special Scorpion modification, and the Scorpion modification can just go on Scorpion Builder Crew for 1 point. And the ability you end up getting is called Overwatch. It's just an order that says when an enemy unit ends a move unengaged and within long range and line of sight of this unit, the Scorpion Builder Crew can make one free ranged attack against that enemy unit. So the other Scorpion modification that we have, that Othel is a fine modification that can end up amplifying the output of one of these Scorpion pieces. But I like the builder one quite a bit too because it lets you kind of set up this no zone of travel for your opponent. So if you're being really aggressive with your Scorpions, then the Othel Yarwick modification is really good. But the thing is that your opponent can kind of mitigate it a little bit by either not charging them or taking that maneuver position away from you. But the Builder's Scorpion modification is a real big no button, and I think that that's kind of valuable when it comes to building one of these more War Machine focused lists. Not that I think that they're super prevalent or anything; they're kind of memey. But the Scorpion modification here makes me want to think that I could probably do a list like this and feel a lot better about it. It almost feels like the Night's Watch attachment box 1 really ends up opening a lot of new avenues for Night's Watch players to engage in. They might not be the most competitive, but they definitely are compelling enough to make me want to put some of them on the table. Holding the number 1 spot, I believe, far above the rest of these. The Night's Watch and Baratheon boxes are very close to one another, but maybe I'm a little bit more biased towards Baratheons in general because I'm really liking them. But the Baratheon box really stands out. It's got 3 legacy attachments, which is kind of meh. Like that's probably the roughest part about this box, but they do bring a solo model, which is cool. So we'll get to the legacy attachments. So the legacy attachments in this one are the Stag Knight Noble, the Master Warden, and the Priestess. So the Master Warden and Stag Knight Noble are pretty mopey to see in here because I think Wardens, Baratheon players have plenty of them, and getting the alternate sculpt isn't really that big of a deal. I mean, it's cool, right? If you want just a different one, then sweet business. It's nice to have other ones in here. But for the most part, I think a lot of us have plenty of these attachments, so it's not a big deal. The Stag Knight Noble is probably the one that feels like the most out of place here. It's already a really underutilized attachment, and it came with a unit that was not really well received, enough to the point where Cool Mini or Not had to almost redesign the entire unit. And it wasn't a complete redesign. I feel like it was not a reimagining, but definitely a redesign for the Stag Knights. But the Noble still isn't something that people are going to be talking about a lot in here, in really any Baratheon unit. So I think that the Stag Knight Noble was kind of a rough include here. The one that is super duper good is the Red Priestess, because the R'hllor Faithful are a super awesome unit, especially when you want to play some of those more faith-based things. I think even if you're not wanting to build faith-based, right, the R'hllor Faithful are just really good. And the Priestess herself is just a phenomenal piece. I know that we've kind of had an adjustment. Cool Mini or Not wants to say it's a correction, but I feel like it's a nerf because they just didn't. The and or typo probably wasn't really a typo. They just put it out and didn't realize how powerful and potent it was. So that's my like controversial take in this whole thing, is just I don't think the Red Priestess was a typo. I think it was a legit nerf because they didn't realize how powerful Panicked and Vulnerable would be as an application. So regardless, I still think she's a phenomenal 1-point piece and is going to be hyper present in many of the Stannis based lists. So having her here is nice. When we look at the new attachments, the first one we come across is the Pike Captain. This one is a 1-point unit that has the Renly loyalty, or 1 point unit attachment that has the Renly loyalty ability, and gives the rule Dauntless to a unit. Just says that each time this unit passes a morale test, they can restore up to 1 wound. So Renly does do a lot of morale buffing, so having something like this in here really helps that army kind of push more of this attrition through survival thing. And when we talk about putting something like this on Rose Knights or even our Wardens themselves, I think that there's a lot of benefit there. When you look at the Rose Knights, you're gaining a wound to do a wound to someone, and when you're looking at the Wardens, they're just digging in for longer and longer because Renly's giving them that big buff, at least the first version of Renly, right? The starter box version. So I think the Pikeman Captain is a really strong piece for the Baratheons in general. Well, not in general. It's good for Renly, and if it's good for Renly, it's good for the game, right? So the next one we come up against is a Thorn Guard Sentinel, and this is a Renly piece as well, so we definitely got a little bit more love pointed towards Renly in this one. But they end up, for 1 point, bring the ability Parry, and it just says that when this unit's attacked with with melee, for each attack die roll of 1, the attacker suffers 1 wound. So we've seen this Parry ability in other places where it's not so effective. I'm looking at you, Jaime Lannister. But in the Baratheons, parry is actually a really good deal because a lot of our units are really tough, they're strong, and they've got that 3+ save. So the two ways to get around that are you either throw really good dice with Sundering and other abilities, or you throw a ton of dice in order to try and force the numbers on those failed armor saves. Now, if you're doing that, that means you're more likely to throw ones, and the Baratheons have tons of ways to put out weaken tokens, so having the increased chance of rolling ones is going to make your opponent think twice before attacking a unit with with a Thorn Guard Sentinel attached to it. So I feel like this is going to be a phenomenal piece for the Baratheon armies. Now we can get to the Stannis love in here. So Renly got 2 unique things. Stannis got 1 unique thing that's split into 2 roles. So we've got the Dragonstone Noble as both a cavalry attachment and a cavalry solo. The attachment version is a steal at 1 point, and it is, of course, Stannis Baratheon loyalty. And it brings the Order Sentinel. This triggers after another friendly unit within long range is attacked. This unit may make a free charge or maneuver action. If they happen to be charging, the target must be the attacking enemy. So for 1 point, we end up getting another way of manipulating charges in the combat phase, or we can just start manipulating the table a little bit by moving some things up. You put this guy in something like the Champions of the Stag. They only have that 4-inch maneuver, but when you end up triggering the Sentinel ability just to get them a little bit closer and maybe get into a better position to charge into the flank of someone, they're going to think twice about throwing attacks into your forward projected Wardens or something like that. I think this guy is criminal for 1 point, and you'll see him in tons of Stannis lists, especially if they're throwing around the Champions of the Stag. There's just so many cool things you can do with this piece and that unit in the Stannis armies. As a 4-point solo, though, he ends up being speed 4, so he's still a little bit on the chuggy side. He has 3 attacks with the Lord's Wrath that hit on 3s. He has a 2+ defense save and a 3+ morale. So where we had the Ranger or the Watch Marshal that was really kind of just more supporty, this guy is a tank. Just is brutal in being able to survive. He ends up bringing quite a few abilities, too. Outside of cavalry and having 3 wounds, which is the perfect number, in my opinion, for solo pieces, much because any D3 wound things, you have to at least spike high on them to be able to kill them in one shot. But you also have to point some real effort at taking out a 3-wound model with a 2+ defense save. So the first order that he brings is, again, Sentinel. So now this guy can trigger that Sentinel ability for the maneuver or charge on his own. So that's really good. Help him free up some of those low units where someone might be throwing in, just a single rank unit into your pieces to be able to try and tie them up. This guy says no, and sometimes can even get a free charge out of it. The other thing is the Lord's Wrath has a couple abilities on it. First of all, it's Sundering, which is awesome on a cavalry piece. So when we combine Sundering with Sentinel, we end up likely being able to get into a lot of flanks, so he'll have a -2 armor modifier to or defense modifier for those pieces. Really, really solid stuff there. The other thing that he has on the Lord's Wrath is that he deals +2 automatic hits for each wound he happens to have suffered. So if people are putting some damage into this piece, they're going to suffer for it, because the most attacks or the most hits this guy is ever going to get when he charges is if they happen to leave him on 1 wound, and that means he'll throw 7 attacks for a solo piece. That's dangerous. It's not like the Mountain That Rides dangerous. I mean, it kind of is, but just in a different way. But when you've got Sundering likely getting flanks on this one, I think that the Dragonstone Noble is just ridiculous. And of all the attachment boxes, if there was one of them that you would want to double up on, it is this box. This is the box you want 2 of if you're a Baratheon player. I wouldn't even, like, if you're worried about having those Stag Knight Nobles, convert them into something else, because this box is phenomenal. You want 2 of these Dragonstone Nobles, whether you want them on double units of Champions of the Stag, or just being able to bring them as solo pieces to help you manipulate the table a little bit more. The Night's Watch one, I also could say you probably could buy 2 of those and be pretty happy with that, especially with those Watch Marshals. But 100%, if you buy one of these boxes for Baratheons, you buy 2 of them for the reason why you're buying one. Well, I hope you enjoyed the discussion around the ordering of the attachment boxes from top to bottom, and let me know in the comments below what you think your stack would look like for these. I think that the Baratheon and Night's Watch boxes kind of have a massive advantage over the other ones, just for bringing a solo model that they desperately needed. And the Free Folk one just, like, didn't stand a chance right out of the gate. Like, it's just going to be the bottom, and that's the way it was going to be. It almost is at the point where I kind of don't want the Free Folk attachment box, in hopes that maybe the Walrus Chieftain comes out somewhere else. And I know that that's kind of like a disservice, but honestly, like, you're paying the $35 or whatever for one piece that might not even make it into one of your units. I know, like, I'm hopeful for some of the changes to some of those units that I had mentioned in the video that the Walrus Clan Chieftain could go into, but really I'm just not super stoked about what they did with that box outside of the extra sculpts. And it's not that, you know, I'm not a gung-ho, like, competitive player all the time, like, I can't switch off of that, but, like, honestly, the aesthetics for the alternate sculpts don't really push me enough to say, yeah, get one of these boxes right away. It's like something you super got to do. And I'm also in the tainted perspective that I've got plenty of those things. So for people who don't have a lot of those, definitely probably something they'd want to look more intently at. But for me right now, like, that Free Folk box is kind of flat, especially when you compare it to, like, the Baratheon and Night's Watch box. Like, they aren't even in the same league. Like, somehow they made it on the same list, and they really shouldn't have. Like, if there were another box that came out for this, I probably would have been like honorable mention, like Free Folk, and that would be a service to them. But thanks for making it to the end on this one. I know it was really long, but there's a ton to unpack here, and I'm sure that we're going to see a lot of different ways that these attachments can be utilized as the game evolves, and I'm super stoked to see that there's still a ton of momentum in putting out new things for A Song of Ice and Fire. You know, Cool Mini or Not hasn't had the greatest track record in the past of being able to stick with some of the games that they make, and, you know, I'm elated that Song of Ice and Fire has made it this, and I absolutely cannot wait until I can start engaging in this game again with my friends as soon as life returns to some state of whatever new normal is going to be for us. Thanks again for sticking with me on this one, and I hope you enjoy this video all the way through, and I look forward to making the next one for you. If you want to see anything in particular, I know I've kind of been off the radar of A Song of Ice and Fire stuff for a while, but let me also know in the comments below if there's something that you want me to talk about or want my opinions on, or some kind of structure around in a video. I know things are getting weird with the upcoming update for A Song of Ice and Fire, but I look forward to trying to re-engage back with this stuff.